provincial program. And really you're looking at, Canada was at one time contemplating an 8-year period, but again, registration periods would vary from program to program. There has to be an implementation of the offset protocol. There has to be ongoing monitoring. Data management requirements must be met by verifiers and by the project proponents. People have to report their results and to the bodies that they report to. And finally, a verification. Again, it's an independent verifier will come in and look at your books and look at see if all your information and your data is accurate. Once you're involved in the carbon finance scheme and you register your project and you're going to work, essentially some regulatory body or some body itself will provide you with a certificate, basically certifying your reductions. They'll issue some credits that you'll be able to use as a negotiable instrument. You'll be able to trade those credits. Some of them are bankable. You name it. So it really, the whole carbon finance regime operates just like any other corporate security that's out there. So it really becomes a financial instrument for anybody, or if a First Nations involved, be a financial instrument that's owned by the First Nation community. And of course, trading can happen with the private sector. First Nations will be able to sell their credits to pretty much whoever they want. And the value of the credits will be determined by supply and demand and by the marketplace. As I mentioned, I mean, at one point the voluntary market was about $700 million, but the value was cut in half because of problems in the financial market. So even though you may have credits, again, it'll go up and down just like the value of those will go up and down just like any other stock. Now, with respect to projects that are available for First Nation communities to get involved in carbon finance schemes, there's quite a bit of them, but the cheapest one right now is really regards to forest and afforestation. This is where, you know, an area has been clear-cut in a First Nation community. They can go into some replantation, reclamation of the forests, and also look at you know, planting different types of trees, that type of thing. So it's a whole slew of activities that can happen in the forestry field with respect to carbon finance. There's also the opportunities for cleaning up communities' landfill. They can develop get some new technologies in the community that will capture the methane and other combustion that result from landfills. And again, those credits, by capturing all that methane and those other gases, will be a credit that's available to First Nation communities. There's also opportunities for First Nations that are involved in agriculture to use reduced or no tillage in planting crops. Again, that's a tradable or an example of a carbon credit that's a project that's available. And there's a whole slew of wind energy, clean energy type of programs, whether it be wind energy, solar power, a number of initiatives that are available. And this is ideal for a lot of northern communities that still rely on diesel generation. First Nations can look at supplementing their energy use with some of the cleaner technologies. Again, some of those will be available for carbon finance credits. There's forest management activities, water management activities, and there's anaerobic biodigesters, which is basically deals with animal waste for agriculture or for cattle farmers, that type of thing. So there's a whole area of carbon finance opportunities that are available to First Nation communities. I know a lot of people in the past have been focusing on the forest, but clearly it's available. There's a whole slew of areas that are available to First Nation communities. And the positive aspect of this is that, you know, some of the stuff with regards to bringing in clean energy or, you know, landfill gas and capture, it may potentially bring in new technologies for the First Nation communities themselves, rather than relying on some outdated, you know, diesel generators or outdated equipment. These programs can really have the potential of bringing in some new technologies to First Nation communities. Now, with respect to carbon finance, the Assembly First Nations does recognize that First Nations may be interested in for a number of reasons. First of all, if a First Nation was to get involved in carbon finance or some offset scheme, they would be entitled to credits which will basically diversify their income. They would have money they'd be able to use for whatever purposes they want, whatever priorities the community has, and really assist them in economic opportunities and opening up new business ventures for First Nation communities. Again, the First Nations are proponents of a project. They would be able to, they would own their own credits. They would control them. They'll be involved in, how their land's used and those types of issues. So I think that's another important aspect. Also, as I mentioned, getting involved in carbon finance would bring new technology to First Nation communities, provide hopefully clean energy projects to First Nation communities. We also feel that where First Nations get involved in carbon finance and start parceling out the forests for themselves, some of the traditional forests or even off-reserve lands, and looking at peatlands and a whole slew of some of the traditional areas. Once we start occupying the field, really it's an act by First Nation governments where they're starting to assert their jurisdiction over their traditional lands. If they're claiming a parcel of forest as theirs, essentially an industry person or an environmental non-governmental organization really can't come in and say, well, we want this ourselves, because the First Nation already have possession of those areas. So I think it would solidify First Nation rights over some of the traditional lands and also over the carbon sinks themselves. And finally, where First Nations do get involved in carbon schemes, there's an opportunity for First Nations to develop their own standards. Right now there are a lot of standards out there with respect to carbon finance. One of the higher ones is the gold standard. But there's an opportunity for First Nations to develop an Indigenous standard where it looks at Indigenous rights, where Indigenous people's rights are not impacted by carbon finance schemes or different activities by the markets themselves. First Nations will be able to utilize their traditional knowledge, and that may be an area where, provide some assistance to other Indigenous peoples around the world or even other actors in industry, how to behave more appropriately when it comes to the environment. So there are a number of interests that are available to First Nation communities should they participate in carbon finance. Now, because carbon finance is a new area relatively, there's still a lot of voids that are out there. First of all, there's not a regulatory framework in Canada as of yet. There are some provincially, but federally there isn't. So the basic question a lot of people are posing is, who really owns the carbon credits? Right now there is a policy vacuum, there's a legislative vacuum. There are a number of voluntary programs that are out there that First Nations can participate in. But again, the legal certainty that involves this isn't there, which is why I think is another reason First Nations should get involved in carbon finance, because as we start to occupy the field, as we start to possess the lands and start to use the lands for our own purposes, really prevents other people from getting in there. One area that First Nations are becoming more concerned about is offset programs themselves, like the WCI, are looking at removing the credit from the title. So basically, if you own the forest or a First Nation owns a forest, the fact that they own the forest may not be creditable. The credit will tie with the carbon reduction itself. And for us, essentially, the Assembly First Nations and other First Nations have been advocating that, yes, it should be right. Credit should rest with the title. Whoever owns the title should get the credit. There's issues with respect to third-party and third-party liabilities. For instance, if a third party sets up a carbon scheme by a First Nation community, who is really liable should something go up? Say it's a forest project, and a lot of work is going into improving the forest, and for some reason the forest goes up in a forest fire and all the trees burn down. Who would be liable for those types of things? Would it be the project proponent? Would it be the landowner? Would it be the developer? Some of these issues are still not fully worked out yet. There's also a problem with respect to third parties and provincial governments getting involved in carbon finance, where you see large sects of land being parceled out, and really the question becomes is if a First Nation community it's in a boreal forest area, has an area surrounding the community designated as a carbon sink, will First Nations themselves be prohibited from hunting in that area, from using the forest for firewood like they have in the past?